I want to thank you for attending this summit, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your commitment to the profession of teaching, especially these last 2 years.
Teachers have done an incredible job, and I have never been prouder to be part of this profession. You know, I know that you've worked long hours. You had to turn your curriculum around in a second.
What you've done has been inspirational. In the United States, with the Build Back Better agenda that President Biden is proposing, we're going to raise the bar. The goal is not to get to schools the way they were in March 2020. We must build back better.
When my husband got elected, the one thing I said all across America is standing right beside him will be a teacher. There's an educator there looking out for you every single day. What better way to honor teachers than to hear from them directly?
I teach high school science, so what excites me about teaching is that I get to reignite that flame and get students really excited about learning and learning about themselves and learning about the world, and also learning about their place in science and how science can be a part of their life.
One of the biggest things that I enjoy about being a teacher is being able to work with students every single day, see their smiles, see how engaged they are with lessons, but also just being able to build those relationships inside and outside of school.
To me, being a teacher is a profession of profound gratitude. When I came to the US, I was unable to speak English or understand my teachers, but I learned through their kindness, compassion, and caring that there's another way of doing things, as opposed to how I grew up in my own country.
I just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for being part of this profession and doing all that you do for our students.
Colleagues, well, what an honour to be welcomed by the First Lady and Secretary Cardona. And of course, the First Lady, a wonderful educator in her own right. My name is Anthony McKay. I am your moderator and have indeed been your moderator since our inaugural convening in 2011 in New York City. So Secretary Cardona, it's wonderful to be back in the US, and obviously you as host of the 2021 ISTP, we are delighted to be here. We thank you and we look forward to your opening remarks.
Thank you, Tony. Welcome to the 2021 International Summit on the Teaching Profession. I'm honored to host on behalf of the United States, together with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and Education International. It's great to be joined by my colleagues, Randy Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers, Becky Pringle, President of the National Education Association, and Carissa Moffett Miller, CEO of the Council of Chief State School Officers. I also want to express my appreciation to our counterparts from around the world. I'm grateful that technology allows 14 high-performing countries in Asia, Europe, and the Western Hemisphere to come together with us. Welcome. Across our countries, the work we do to improve teaching and learning and support all students is essential. If the pandemic taught us anything, it's that we are all interconnected. There's nothing more important than supporting teachers and students as we safely reopen schools for in-person learning. We recover from the pandemic and we reimagine the future of education. The International Summit on the Teaching Profession is different than most international meetings. When the summit launched 10 years ago, it was the first time that ministers and secretaries of education from around the world sat at the table with the representatives from the teaching profession. Imagine that. But luckily, it wasn't the last time. ISTP is still going strong, and the United States is looking forward to being back after a 4-year hiatus. We are ready to tackle our shared challenges and work collaboratively with you. As we plan to re-engage, my team looked back at previous summits and reflected on what we learned. In 2012, members of the US delegation said that their most powerful learning was the need to build a coherent, systemic, thoughtful process of engaging all actors in comprehensive, large-scale change. This seems just as relevant now, maybe even more so, as we aim to build back better from the pandemic. The overarching theme of this summit is timely because of the essential question: how can governments, teachers, organizations, and schools as centers of their communities collaborate around the future of education and the whole child to provide an excellent education to all? And I stress to all. I saw promise in one school district I recently visited, Delran Township School District in New Jersey. Delran developed collaborative labor management practices that they used before and throughout the pandemic. These efforts resulted in greater student success, increased educator engagement, and positive school culture. Real collaboration among states, district managements, and union leaders improve public schools and advances equity. It's about intentional collaboration. As an educator, I understand the challenges we face, but also the incredible rewards of working to help students grow and thrive. And to do that, we need to invest in teachers. We need to address teacher shortages by improving teacher preparation, strengthening pipelines for underrepresented teachers, including educators of color, and supporting our current teachers. We need to focus on the whole child and provide what every child needs to succeed. That means accelerating learning and building school communities where all students feel like they belong. We need to leverage preschools, elementary and secondary schools, and communities so that student, academic, social, emotional, physical, and mental health needs are met. I'm proud that today the U.S. Department of Education released a suite of resources to help educators support their students' social and emotional well-being and their mental health. These resources cover supports for students across early childhood, elementary and secondary schools, and higher education settings too. Especially as we just observed World Mental Health Day, I'm proud that the Biden administration is sharing important resources and providing support for a wide range of programs to holistically support children and families. I look forward to working with you. We need your ideas and your experience about the best ways to elevate and enhance the teaching profession to improve instruction for all students. Let us learn from the past while looking to the future to provide excellence and equity for all. Thank you.
Secretary Cardona, thank you very much indeed. And as you indicated, this is a wonderful cooperative venture between the host jurisdiction, obviously this year the US, and OECD and Education International. Andreas Schleicher, you of course have been with us co-leading the ISTP since its inception. People know you as Director for Education and Skills, but also, of course, as Special Advisor on Education Policy to the Secretary General. We have received, again, a wonderful background report each year, Andreas. You provide us with a fantastic opportunity to prepare ourselves, and we thank you once again, and we look forward to your opening remarks. Andreas.
Thanks, Tony, and a very warm welcome from the OECD. And also, thanks for convening this year's ISTP, Secretary Cardona. Bringing government and the teaching profession together is so important at these crossroads where we're all wondering, how do we educate students for their future, not just our past? And we have a difficult year behind us. You know, in many countries, a good share of the last school year was lost. You see that here by the position of countries on the vertical axis. But COVID infection rates, marked here by the size of the bubble, were largely unrelated to the number of days in which schools were closed. Now, what predicts the extent of school closures so much better is the quality of our school systems. here proxied by the PISA scores. Now, high-performing education systems, you see them here on the right side, with strong frontline capacity and resilience, were so much better at maintaining operations, even in severe disruptions. And the quality of the relationship between governments and teacher unions was so central to this. Obviously, schools have done a lot to compensate for with remote learning. But as you can see here, in the case of Ireland, the vast majority of parents saw a negative impact of school closures on learning, not surprisingly. No. Even in star performer Finland, half of the students encountered issues with motivation, and sometimes it's insufficient support, insufficient guidance. No. But that's just scratching the surface. No. Here you can see how in the Netherlands, anxiety, sleep trouble have skyrocketed among youth during lockdowns. Well, all of this suggests that it's going to take a lot longer to recover the social emotional losses than just lost learning. If you have doubts about the importance of schools for the well-being of students, see data from our last PISA assessment, which show how much of students' satisfaction with life is actually predicted by school factors such as disciplinary climate, the sense of belonging, teacher support, and teacher feedback. And our latest OECD study shows that students who get along well with their teachers report much higher social emotional skills. For example, you see here, greater curiosity, greater optimism, more achievement motivation, greater self-efficacy, but also greater empathy, more emotional control, more trust. I guess what students will remember from this pandemic most is a teacher who reached out to them, who took a real interest in their lives and who helped them understand who they are and who they want to become, and who wasn't just a great instructor, but also a great coach, a great mentor, a great facilitator. All of that highlights that education is not a transactional business, but a relational experience. And finally, we should not see the social development in opposition to academic achievement. In fact, the two are very closely connected, even at the system level. Now, for example, you see here a very robust cross-country correlation between PISA academic achievement, here on the vertical axis, and the extent to which students have a growth mindset, here on the horizontal axis. Contrast Estonia, which comes out first on the growth mindset and very well on learning outcomes, with Indonesia, where students struggle with academic achievement and largely believe that success is fixed by the intelligence they were born with. And you can see how students with a growth mindset were more likely to persist to finish difficult tasks. They had a greater confidence in their abilities. They were less likely to be afraid of failure, and so greater value in school for their future. We can support teachers better with this. Now, when we measure teacher stress, we found that it wasn't much related to the time teachers spent with students. That's the blue line here. It had much more to do with the stuff that teachers do that have actually little to do with their core mission. You see here that administrative work was the highest stress factor. That's the green line in this chart. And of course, we all know that in most countries, teachers' salaries are not particularly competitive when you compare them with the average earnings of college graduates. No? There are just a few exceptions on the left side where teacher salaries fare well. No? All these things will matter even more in the future. No? The kind of things that are easy to teach and test are now easy to digitize, to automate. No? Success is not just about teaching students something, but about helping them develop a reliable compass to navigate their own future. And we know how to educate second-class robots, people who are good at repeating what we told them. But in this age of artificial intelligence, we need to ask ourselves harder, what will make us human? Think about creativity. You'd hope that students become more creative as they grow up, in the same way as their mathematics and science skills improve. But our data show exactly the opposite. Students' creativity was lower among 15-year-olds than among 10-year-olds in every city for which we have data. I know psychologists will give you lots of explanations for this, but let's not forget that schools often expect compliance from students in the same way they do from teachers. And that drives out creativity curiosity. I know many countries are working on this and building new curricula around a whole child concept. But as always, the road of educational reform is littered with many good ideas that were just poorly implemented. But implementation can be done well. Portugal organized its entire curriculum around values and principles. And the reform has stuck. Why? Because they did that through co-creation between scientists, teachers, administrators, and most importantly, students themselves from the youngest ages. And they had a plan to involve the public. On the launch day, they live streamed to every school in the country. They got the message through with the most popular TV presenter, the national football coach, a scientist, a young pop star. That's what really matters. The point is that what matters most is the social fabric that we build in our school systems. It is important that we get out of the hole of commodifying education, where students become consumers and parents clients and teachers service providers. Tomorrow's schools are only going to succeed as a whole of society in a price. To achieve transformative change, don't ask yourself how many of your teachers support your ideas. Ask yourself, how do you enable teachers to collaborate effectively? Now, remember that teacher professional collaboration, according to OECD data, is the best predictor for the use of effective teaching practice and job satisfaction, more so than salaries and class sizes. Programs and pilots rarely scale. It is always culture that scales, and culture is always the hallmark of effective leadership. Now, what matters really is to be transparent with teachers and school leaders about where is change heading and what it means for them. To be aware of how organizational policies and practices can either facilitate or inhibit change and transformation. To tackle institutional structures that are too often built around the interests and habits of adults rather than learners. And to use power and influence to build alliances and coalitions that are needed to help rules become good practice and good practice to become culture eventually. We all know that real change often happens in deep crisis. So let's use this moment. Thank you very much.
Andreas, thank you. And Susan Hopgood, as president of Education International, you have also been part of ISTP from its inception. And each year, we also receive a background briefing from EI that, together with the background report that's produced by OECD, together, those two documents help to orientate us and to prepare us. So thank you for doing that again. It's wonderful to see you. Let me invite you as co-host with OECD and the US to give your opening remarks. Thank you, Susan.
Thanks very much, Tony, and it's great to be here. May I first of all, though, thank Secretary Cardona for agreeing to host this summit. It's a decade since the United States government organised the first international summit on the teaching profession. So it seems fitting that the US should again agree to be the summit host. The US initiated an enduring, optimistic and unique institution in 2011. Now you've returned in that same spirit with a renewed commitment from the very top to quality education for all, and we welcome you back. And we have so much to grapple with. While many societies are recovering from the pandemic, it's not finished yet. Most societies are recovering from the pandemic, and it remains endemic. Resilience is now the name of the game. If we've learnt one lesson from COVID, it is that there is no educational substitute for schools. As we find in our joint EI-OECD principles for educational recovery, the pandemic has highlighted the essential role of schools in the education of children and young people, which means that resilient, effective, functioning school systems able to meet the challenges they face can only achieve that status if ministers, teachers and the unions work together. Working together, not only to solve day-to-day crises created by the pandemic, but to place educational recovery at the heart of society's aspiration to build back better. And that's what this summit is about, collaborating to enable our schools and their teachers to be thriving communities, meeting the needs of all students and helping them to become enthusiastic and optimistic learners. You all have our briefing, so I'll just make a few points on the key themes of this summit. It may be obvious, but it's worth repeating. No society can achieve economic and social well-being without putting equity at its core. And achieving equity is not only a moral, but a practical question. Aspirations for achieving equity are nothing if there aren't practical measures to achieve it. Equity has been front and centre of our ISTPs as well, and no more than at the centre of this one. It has to be, given the crisis we've all been going through. To achieve equity, we need to know the extent of disadvantage. How do we know which students have suffered the worst in their learning and well-being? Do we have strategies for identifying students with the greatest needs and acting on them? And what about schools whose students are the most disadvantaged? Our 2014 and 2016 summits tackled the issue of student disadvantage head-on. Then, both EI and the OECD set out practical programs for tackling disadvantage, which we've summarised in our briefing. Now COVID has sharpened the need for these programs even more. Sufficient and stable funding and long-term frameworks for support that prioritise students who have suffered the most must be budgeted and sustained. Which brings me to the whole child. We welcome the fact that how we meet the learning and social and emotional needs of young people is at last on the agenda. Students with high levels of well-being, or dare I say it, happy children, will learn better than those who are unhappy. It seems obvious, but the last few decades have seen too many education systems place a higher value on high-stakes assessment than on students' social and emotional development, when surely high achievement and high levels of student well-being should have gone hand in hand. During the pandemic, schools and their teachers have had to adapt to extraordinary circumstances by constantly innovating. Indeed, one of the many lessons of the pandemic is that the enormous creativity and innovation teachers have shown during the pandemic has highlighted how inappropriate, imposed, top-down and inflexible curricula and assessment are. The responsibility for adapting the curriculum and its assessment to meet the learning needs of their students must rest with teachers. This is the best way that schools can put the well-being of students at the centre of teaching, while at the same time offering a rich and broad curriculum for all students. Indeed, countries such as Finland and Scotland have done so already. In short, COVID has taught us that trust in teachers linked to high professional standards are the pillars of successful education systems, and they are essential to meeting the needs of the whole child. Which brings me to the well-being of teachers. I could elaborate at length about teacher well-being because I think that some policymakers still don't understand the seamless connection between teacher well-being and student achievement. This is despite our 2018 summit in Lisbon concluding that teacher well-being was an issue whose time had come. Well, I'll be polite. I don't think it's an issue whose time has come quite yet. Let's rectify this situation at this summit. Let's recognise that there is a strong case, as we and the OECD have said, for governments and teacher unions to work together to improve teachers' working conditions as part of the post-pandemic recovery. Let's now support an international study on teacher well-being so we can learn from each other about how to ensure that teachers maintain their confidence and enthusiasm throughout their professional careers. I want to finish by commending and celebrating the summits, and this one in particular since it's the 10th anniversary. They are unique. They represent the best of democratic discussion. There may be disagreements as well as agreements, but we all have a common aim: working together to make sure that quality education for all is at the heart of society's and, yes, our government's aspirations. Thank you.
Susan, thank you. And colleagues, can I just indicate our collective thanks to Secretary Cardona to Andrea Schleicher and to Susan Hopgood for our opening session, and of course, again, to the First Lady for the generous welcome. We, at the moment, have been joined by not only delegates and observers, but also by members of the wider public. And we're delighted that many did join for this opening session. We invite you at this moment to consider rejoining us on day 3 for our final session. But thanks again for being part of this more formal opening session of this year's ISTP.